There are so many presets out there, and look, don't get me wrong, I love presets. I'm a preset guy. I own verygoodpresets.com, very important part of my life, and I would love nothing more than for you to go right now and buy our Tri-X preset or our FP4 preset or Jupiter or any of our black and white monochrome presets. That would make my heart really happy. But this video is not about presets. It's going to be truly about editing monochrome. Whether you shot on a color sensor and you're going to convert to black and white, whether you shot on a monochrome sensor and how we're going to dial in contrast, or whether you shot black and white film, like what do you do with that film once you get it scanned and on your computer. I'm going to show you my process for editing monochrome from the base of nothing, no presets, just diving in and editing monochrome. But before I do all of that, I just wanted to say that I hope you're watching this video from a place of peace in your life. If this is your first time here, my name is Dave. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from the Bay Area of California. I started this channel to inspire you and empower you and educate you with all sorts of photography information, so be sure to subscribe if that resonates. And if you ever reach out or comment, I always try to respond because community comes first, so be sure to join this community. All right, let's talk about editing color images into monochrome. And this section is probably going to be the longest because we are going to lay out some principles here that we're going to pull into the conversation about monochrome sensors and editing film. So let's go ahead and jump in. So for today, I'm going to be using the Adobe Monochrome. I'm not using anything else, just Adobe Monochrome as our base profile, because if you have Lightroom, you have this profile and you can follow along with your own images. Now that we've got this image converted into monochrome, everything we do on out is going to be all about shaping contrast. Because my issue many times when I put something from color into monochrome, or even when I'm just looking at a monochrome image, is monochrome gets really busy because of all the different points of contrast happening across an entire image. And for that reason, I just want to completely shape my own contrast. So here's my process. The first thing I always do is I take the global contrast all the way down. It's gone, it's done, and to me already this image looks so much better. But I'm going to rebuild that contrast, but I'm not going to use the global contrast slider. That's going to stay down on almost every single image moving forward. I'm going to rebuild that contrast using the black slider as well as the white slider. And then once I have like a good base of contrast using the black and white faders here, I will use shadows to even it out a little more. And I never touch highlights. I leave highlights right where they are, don't touch them. And while this particular photo was quite underexposed, I'll typically at this point though in the edit get the exposure to where I want it, either with the exposure slider as I've done here, or I'll come over to my curve and just pump up the midtones. And to me, pumping up the midtones on this part of our curve tool gives me a very pleasing monochrome look. So let's head over to this image and do the same thing, and then we're going to talk about color mixing in monochrome. I'm going to first take this, we're going to make it monochrome. I'm going to remove all the contrast and then rebuild that contrast a bit with blacks and whites. And I'm going to even it out with shadow. I would prefer this image to be brighter, so I'm going to use the tone curve here to pump up these midtones. And now I've got a starting point to get into the channel mixer in Lightroom. Your channel mixer lets you take the various colors that are in the photo and shape the luminance of them. The goal with monochrome is to make sure your subject is popping off in terms of contrast from what is around it so it stands out and comes into the foreground. Now, if we look at the original image here, we've got a lot of green, blue, and brown. So if I take that logic, I can bring the luminance of green down. And now we've introduced contrast back into the grass, but I don't like that look because the sheep have a black face and black legs. And so I'm not really interested in bringing all that contrast down. That's not going to make them pop. Instead, what I would do in a photo like this is bring the blue down a little bit to draw attention to the sheep. And basically when I have that starting point, I just will wiggle every fader to see what it's going to do. So here's the red one, and I see that's creating contrast on the hillside. So I'm going to bring that nice and low and get some dark tones up here to make these sheep pop off. Now let's do orange, and I can see here that orange is affecting their wool, and so I'm gonna make that brighter to make that pop off a little more. Yellow, let's take a look. All that grass is full of yellow tones, and so I think I'm gonna leave it as it is for now. Same with green. I mean, look at the contrast range in green. I'm gonna leave that there as well. We've got some gradient going on in aqua, but I'm not gonna mess with it. Same with purple, but I'm not gonna mess with it. And same with magenta, though magenta is affecting the hillside, I'm gonna bring it down. Now to taste here, you could go back and maybe bring a little bit of contrast into the grass with greens and yellows, which I do think maybe helps those sheep pop off a little more. But for the most part, this image is massively improved from the standard monochrome look that would have just been applied had we left the contrast where it was and just maybe turn the exposure up. Let's do one more from a color sensor. Let's go over here to this portrait taken in Yosemite. Let's convert it to black and white. And let's get rid of that contrast like we've been doing. We will rebuild contrast in blacks and whites. Gonna smooth it out just a touch more with shadows. And notice I'm compensating. I'm increasing shadows, but I'm bringing the blacks down. And I've hit a better starting point for this photo. Now let's come over here and let's see what's red. And I see that it's his skin tones. I'm gonna brighten him up a little bit. Orange is gonna be the sunlight and skin tones. Gonna brighten that up a little bit too because he is backlit, so why not just own it and say the sun is back there, it can be nice and bright, it's the sun. Yellow is not affecting him, see? So it's just affecting that grass. I'm gonna bring the yellow down a little to make him pop a little more. Green, same thing. I'm gonna bring the green down so he stands off more. Got some of this aqua in the trees. His jacket is blue, and so maybe just to make sure his skin popped really clearly, I might bring the blue down a little bit. Purple, we're back into those skin tones, and so I'm gonna bring them up a little. Same with magenta, I'm gonna bring it up just a little. And our image is looking a little flat still, and that's totally fine. We have exposure still a bit low. I'm gonna pump up these midtones to get the exposure up, and then this is where I might bring global contrast back in. And as I do, we have a nice monochrome image. And I will typically go down to clarity at this point, and I'll make it like, -20, -30. I just will get rid of all that clarity, and I'll take sharpness down all the way too. And then you can, of course, add grain to your own personal taste. But I mean, look at the difference between this image with this type of approach and just a simple conversion with exposure. This approach always, to me, just looks way better. Same mentality, as fast as possible here. Convert to monochrome. It's so busy. Let's get rid of all that contrast. Put some contrast back in, even it out with shadows. Remember, we don't touch the highlights. We'll go through, see what gets affected here. This is red tones, I'm gonna bring it down. Orange tones, I'm gonna bring down as well. Yellow tones, I'm gonna bring way down. Do you see how your eye is starting to see that my sun there is popping off just a touch more because we brought all the luminance around him down? Aqua's not doing anything. Blue is almost gonna cut the haze from the mountains. Look at that. So there we go, bring the blue down. Purple as well, but I'm gonna bring that down just a touch. I'm gonna come up here now and just bring the midtones exposure up. Then I'm gonna bring down clarity, turn that sharpening way down. And that looks so much better to me than just a simple conversion and an exposure tweak. So here is a portrait taken with an M11 monochrome. The same logic's gonna apply, but let's watch how the dynamic range performs. Contrast all the way down. Gonna reintroduce contrast with blacks, and you're gonna get way more intense tones on a monochrome sensor. I mean, we were down here with no problem on a color sensor, but look how subtle you have to be when you're using a monochrome sensor. Bring those whites up. Let's balance it with the shadow a little bit, but not too much. Again, not touching the highlights. There is no channel mixer when you have a photo that wasn't shot in color, but I'm still gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna bring that clarity down. I'm gonna bring the sharpening way down as well. With monochrome, I might come in here and further tweak this curve and bring the highlights and midtones up a little bit and the blacks down a touch as well. And of course, you do this all to taste. Here is the photo I just edited, and here is the version that came straight out of the camera with an exposure tweak. Okay, so let's look at this film scan together here. With film, it's just a different animal altogether. The first thing I always do is bring the data correct to the curve. So right there, we've brought the black point to where I want it to be. Film already has the contrast baked into it that is characteristic of the film. This is CineStill XX, and it has the contrast that CineStill XX has. And if you shoot Tri-X, FP4, anything else, it's already going to have some predetermined contrast. So in this scenario, I'm not going to mess with that contrast too much. Now with film, I just like a darker edit, so I will typically come to this curve and do the reverse. I'll pull this mid-tone section down, pull these highlights down a little bit as well. I might bring the shadows up to try to make sure we don't bury the blacks completely. And I might bring this contrast slider down a little as well. But we've done very minimal things, and this photo just looks a little richer and more robust now. What I'll typically do with film as well, especially medium format, is actually I might add a little clarity because it helps me to see the grain a little more, clarity and texture. And at the same time, I might come here and take the dehaze down a little just to remove some of the contrast that we've injected into it. So you can see that we've done a lot less to the film, but the biggest thing was getting this curve set correctly on this end of it. And then we look at the before and the after, and we see just this great improvement. So whether you're editing monochrome from a starting point of a color image or a monochrome sensor or even black and white film, these small little tweaks and tips, mostly the contrast, get that global contrast way down, and you're gonna find that editing your monochrome images is way easier when you can completely control that contrast individually. What is the black point? What is the white point? And where is it all gonna go? In doing so, it gives you much more control over your images, and then you can kind of just like save your own preset from this. And from that point, you might have a good starting point for editing your monochrome images. And of course, there are great film looks on very good presets that emulate Tri-X, emulate FP4. There's a couple of cinematic looks as well. You can go check that out, but don't feel any pressure to. This video is really just helping you learn how to edit monochrome photos. I hope that you found this video incredibly helpful. If you did, be sure to like it, make sure you're subscribed, join that Discord, and be part of this community. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.